My name is Lily, and I'm 28 years old. For the last 10 years, my life has been a carefully constructed balancing act of responsibility and invisibility. A month ago, my parents sat me down and told me they were giving my bedroom the only space I've ever truly called my own to my younger cousin. They were moving me into the dusty storage room in the basement. What they didn't know, as they watched me pack my life into boxes with pitying looks, was that they weren't just pushing me into the basement. They were pushing me into the lobby of my very own hotel. If you've ever felt like a guest in your own home, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you about the moment they discovered my secret, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your own space when the world tries to take it away. Before my life was upended, it was painfully predictable. I work as an architectural assistant at a mid-sized firm in Chicago. It's a demanding job, filled with long hours and exacting details. But I love it. I love the clean lines of a blueprint, the promise of turning an idea into a physical space where people can live and dream. My dream was to save enough to one day put a down payment on a small condo of my own. That's why I was still living at home with my parents, Mark and Susan. Or at least, that's the reason I gave everyone. The truth was, they needed me. Since my father's early retirement due to a back injury, my modest rent payment, along with my contributions to groceries and utilities, was what kept their household running smoothly. I was the live-in handyman, the on-call tech support, the family chauffeur in my decade-old but reliable sedan. I was a functional part of the house, like the furnace or the water heater, unseen, unheard, until something went wrong. My relationship with my parents has always been quiet. They provided for me, but affection was a currency they spent sparingly, and almost never on me. That currency was reserved for my cousin, Jessica. Jessica is my Aunt Carol's daughter, 10 years younger than me, and the undisputed golden grandchild of the family. Where I was quiet and studious, Jessica was bubbly and charismatic. Where I was responsible, Jessica was spontaneous. She was the star around which my parents' world seemed to orbit. This wasn't a new development. It was the foundation upon which my entire childhood was built. The inequity was a silent, humming presence in our home, a truth so deeply ingrained that to point it out would have been like questioning the existence of air. I remember when I was 23, saving every penny from my first internship. My old car, a gift from my grandmother, finally gave up on the highway during a snowstorm. I sat shivering for 2 hours waiting for a tow truck. When I finally got home, my father looked at the repair estimate and shook his head. "This is what happens when you don't keep up with maintenance, Lily," he said, his tone dripping with disappointment. "You need to be more responsible with your finances." For the next 6 months, I took 2 buses and a train to get to work, adding 3 hours to my daily commute. The following spring, for Jessica's 17th birthday, my parents co-signed a loan for a brand new convertible. "She's a popular girl," my mother explained, her voice beaming with pride. "She needs reliable transportation to get to her debate club meetings and cheerleading practice." I just nodded, the memory of icy bus stops still fresh in my mind. The pattern repeated itself endlessly. When I graduated from architecture school with honors, my celebration was a sheet cake from the grocery store served in the living room. My parents invited a few neighbors, and the whole event was over in an hour. 2 years later, when Jessica graduated from high school, they threw her a lavish, catered party at a local country club. They used their savings to pay for it. "Your Aunt Carol is a single mother. She's struggling," my father told me when I asked about the expense. "Family has to step in and support each other." The irony was that I was the one paying them rent, which likely freed up the very funds they were using to celebrate the child who had never contributed a dime. The only person who ever seemed to see me clearly was my grandmother, my dad's mom, Eleanor. She was a force of nature, a former history teacher who had a passion for old buildings and an even greater passion for telling the unvarnished truth. She saw my drawings before anyone else did, encouraged my love for design, and listened for hours as I talked about my dreams. "You have a gift for seeing the potential in things, Lilybug," she used to say, her eyes twinkling. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small or unimportant, especially not in the spaces you occupy." She passed away just over a year ago, and the silence she left behind was deafening. Her absence made the quiet indifference of my parents feel even colder. I clung to her memory, to her words, as I navigated my life in their house, a house where I paid my way but never truly felt at home. I was a long-term tenant, perpetually waiting for my real life to begin. A life where I wasn't just a supporting character in someone else's story. I had no idea that my grandmother, even in death, had already laid the foundation for that new life. I just hadn't found the key to the front door yet. I kept telling myself it was temporary. A few more years of saving, of biting my tongue, of watching my parents' faces light up when Jessica called while they barely looked up when I came home from a 12-hour workday. A few more years of being the responsible, reliable, invisible daughter. But I was beginning to learn that temporary is a dangerous word. It can stretch and warp, turning months into years, and years into a lifetime of waiting. I thought I had more time to plan my escape, but I didn't realize a storm was brewing, one that would force me to stop waiting and start building a future for myself, far sooner than I ever expected. The change, when it came, didn't arrive with a thunderclap, but with the worried, tearful voice of my Aunt Carol over the phone. I came home one Tuesday evening to find my mother at the kitchen table, her face etched with concern, the cordless phone pressed to her ear. "Ah, you poor thing. Of course, we'll figure something out," she was cooing. My father stood nearby, his hand on her shoulder, looking grim. This was their crisis pose, a tableau I'd seen countless times, and it almost always involved Aunt Carol or Jessica. My mother hung up and turned to me, her eyes wide. "That was your aunt," she announced, as if I hadn't already guessed. "The most terrible thing has happened." The terrible thing, it turned out, was that the owner of their apartment building had sold the property to a developer, and all the tenants were being evicted with only 60 days' notice. Aunt Carol, who worked part-time as a receptionist and had a history of financial instability, was in a full-blown panic. She had no savings for a security deposit on a new place and was convinced she'd be homeless. But her primary concern, the one my mother relayed with the gravity of a national emergency, was Jessica. "Jessica is in her senior year, Mark," my mother recounted my aunt's words. "This is the most important year of her academic life. She needs stability. She needs a quiet, supportive environment to focus on her studies so she can get into a good college." The implication was clear. While Aunt Carol would scramble to find a new, affordable apartment, Jessica needed a sanctuary, a place insulated from the stress of the move. My father cleared his throat. "We're having a family meeting on Sunday to discuss it," he said, his gaze flicking towards me for a fraction of a second before settling back on my mother. "To figure out the best way to help." I knew what family meeting meant. It meant my parents and Aunt Carol would make a decision, and I would be informed of it later. My role was not to participate, but to accommodate. My initial reaction was one of genuine sympathy. It was a tough situation, and I felt for my aunt. And for Jessica, too. Moving in the middle of your senior year would be difficult for any teenager. I started mentally rearranging things in my head. The guest room was small, mostly used for storage, but it could be cleared out. It had a desk. It would be a tight fit, but we could make it work for a few months. I felt a small sense of pride that our family, despite its dysfunctions, could pull together in a crisis. On Sunday, as predicted, I was not invited to the meeting. My parents drove over to Aunt Carol's apartment for a strategy session. I spent the day at the office, catching up on work, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. When I got home that evening, they were waiting for me in the living room. The decision had been made. "We have wonderful news," my mother began, her smile a little too bright. "We found a solution that will give Jessica the stability she needs and help your aunt get back on her feet. Jessica is going to come stay with us for the rest of the school year," my father announced. "It's the only sensible option. She can keep her routine, stay at her school, and we can make sure she has everything she needs." "That's great," I said, genuinely relieved. "I can help clear out the guest room this weekend. We can get it set up for her." My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of pity and something else, something that looked like apprehension. "Well, that's the thing, honey," my mother said, her voice softening into the tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news she expected me to gracefully accept. "We were thinking Your room is so much bigger. It gets the morning light, which is so much better for studying, and it has its own attached bathroom. I stared at them, the words taking a moment to land. They weren't offering Jessica the guest room. They were offering her my room. The silence stretched. My mind was racing, trying to find the logic, the justification for such a request. I had lived in that room for my entire life. It was filled with my books, my drawings, my half-finished projects. It was my sanctuary from the demands of work and the quiet tensions of the house. So, where would I stay? I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. My father clapped his hands together, a forced, hearty sound that didn't match the unease in his eyes. That's the brilliant part! We can finally clean out that old storage room in the basement. We'll put a fresh coat of paint on it, run an extension cord down there for a lamp. It'll be cozy, like your own little studio apartment. A studio apartment. He was describing a windowless, 10 by 10-foot storage space, known for its dampness in the spring and its collection of spiders in the summer, as a studio apartment. I felt a cold wave wash over me. This wasn't a request. It was a decree. They hadn't asked for my opinion. They had presented their wonderful news as a finished thought, a perfectly reasonable solution where my comfort and my history in the home were merely logistical hurdles to be overcome. The initial shock began to curdle into a slow-burning anger. For the first time, their blatant favoritism wasn't just a matter of unequal gifts or praise. It was a physical displacement. They were literally removing me from my space to make room for her. And the most painful part was the look on their faces. They genuinely expected me to smile, nod, and thank them for the opportunity to sleep in the basement. They saw it as my duty, my role, to shrink myself to make her comfortable. I had always known I wasn't the priority, but I never imagined I wasn't even a consideration. And as I stood there, speechless, I realized this was more than just a temporary inconvenience. It was a declaration of my place in the family, and it was a place I was no longer sure I could accept. The week leading up to Jessica's arrival was a masterclass in passive aggression and emotional manipulation. My parents adopted an air of cheerful efficiency, as if we were all embarking on a fun home renovation project together. They talked endlessly about paint swatches for Jessica's new room and bought a new duvet cover and curtains to match her aesthetic. Every conversation was a painful reminder that my space was being systematically erased and redecorated for someone else. My attempts to express my feelings were met with a wall of practiced dismissal. The first major incident was the decluttering of my room. On Saturday morning, my mother appeared at my door with a stack of empty cardboard boxes. "Time to get this place cleared out, sweetie," she chirped. "Jessica will be here next weekend, and we want it to be perfect for her." I started to pack my books and clothes, but when I moved to my desk, where my architectural models and large format drawings were carefully arranged, my father stepped in. "You know, Lily," he said, picking up a detailed model of a library I'd spent a month creating, "you really have too much of this stuff. Maybe this is a good opportunity to downsize. You could probably sell some of this online." He wasn't seeing a collection of my professional work and passion. He saw clutter. He saw an obstacle to Jessica's comfort. I tried to explain that these were essential for my portfolio, that they represented years of hard work. He just shrugged. "Well, there's certainly no room for them in the basement. You'll have to figure something out." I spent the rest of the day carefully wrapping my models and stacking them in a corner of the garage, feeling like I was packing away pieces of my own identity. The next blow came when they unveiled my new room. My father had, as promised, slapped a coat of beige paint on the cinderblock walls of the basement storage room. He'd laid down a stained remnant of carpeting that smelled faintly of mildew and run a single, garish-looking extension cord from the laundry room, which snaked across the floor to a single lamp. "See?" he said, beaming with pride. "Cozy." The room was barely large enough for my bed and a small dresser. There was no closet, no window, and the air was thick and heavy. My desk wouldn't fit, meaning I'd have no space to work from home. When I pointed this out, my mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, you can just use the kitchen table late at night when everyone's asleep. It's no big deal." The lack of concern for my professional needs was staggering. My career, The one thing that was wholly mine was being treated as an inconvenient hobby that could be pursued in the dead of night, out of sight and out of mind. Once Jessica moved in, the situation escalated from quietly insulting to openly hostile. She was not a grateful guest. She treated the arrangement as her birthright. She played loud music at all hours, left her clothes strewn across the bathroom floor, and invited friends over without asking. My parents, who had always enforced strict rules about cleanliness and noise with me, said nothing. They tiptoed around her, refilling her snack bowl and constantly asking if she needed anything. I, on the other hand, was now subject to a new set of rules. One evening, I was down in my basement cell, trying to finish a critical project for work. The deadline was the next morning. I had my laptop balanced on a stack of books on my lap. Around 11 p.m., my father came down. "Lily, can you turn that light off soon?" he asked, squinting. "The glow is coming up through the floorboards into the living room, and it's keeping Jessica awake." I was speechless. My 14-hour workday, my critical deadline, was an inconvenience to his precious granddaughter's sleep schedule. I tried to have a calm, rational conversation with my mother the next day. I found her in the kitchen, humming as she packed a special lunch for Jessica. "Mom," I began carefully, "I'm really struggling with the new arrangement. I have no space to work, and I feel like I'm constantly being told I'm in the way." She turned from the counter, her face instantly clouding over. "Lily, I am so disappointed in you," she said, her voice sharp. "Your cousin is going through a difficult time. The least you can do is be supportive and not make everything about you. You're being incredibly selfish." The accusation of selfishness was their go-to weapon. It was designed to shut down any complaint, to make me feel guilty for having needs of my own. It worked. For a while. I retreated, questioning myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was I just jealous? The constant gaslighting was starting to erode my sense of reality. The final confirmation that I wasn't crazy came from my best friend, Chloe. She came over to pick me up for dinner one night. When I led her down to the basement to grab my purse, her jaw dropped. She stood in the doorway of my cramped, damp room, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Oh my God, Lily!" she whispered, her voice a mixture of horror and pity. "They actually put you in here? This isn't a bedroom. This is a punishment." We went to a nearby diner, and I poured out everything, the comments, the double standards, the feeling of being erased. Chloe listened intently, her anger growing on my behalf. "They are not treating you like a daughter," she said firmly when I finished. "They're treating you like an unwanted tenant who pays her bills on time. The fact that you pay them anything to live like this is insane. You are a successful, professional woman, and they have you sleeping next to a water heater. This is not normal, and it is not okay." Hearing it from an outside perspective was like a splash of cold water. Chloe was right. My feelings were valid. The situation wasn't okay. Her words gave me a sliver of the confidence I had lost. I was their daughter, and I deserved, at the very least, a safe and respectful place to sleep in the house I helped maintain. The conversation with Chloe planted a seed of rebellion in my mind. I started secretly looking at apartment listings online, just to see what was out there. The thought of leaving felt both terrifying and exhilarating, but I was still scared. I was still caught in the web of obligation and guilt they had woven around me for years. I knew something had to change, but I was still waiting for a sign, for one final push that would make leaving not just an option, but a necessity. I didn't have to wait long. That final push was coming, and it was going to be more callous and dismissive than anything I could have imagined. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Saturday afternoon in late October. It wasn't a loud, dramatic explosion, but a quiet act of desecration that severed the last thread of hope I had for my relationship with my parents. For as long as I could remember, the space above the fireplace in our living room had been occupied by a large, framed, architectural print. It wasn't a family photo or an expensive piece of art. It was a detailed, beautiful rendering of the Eleanor Grand, a historic hotel in downtown Chicago that had been saved from demolition in the 1970 seconds. My grandmother, Eleanor, had been part of the preservation society that saved it. As a graduation gift, she had given me a rare, signed print from the original architect. It was more than just a picture. It was a symbol of everything. She and I shared a love for history, for design, for saving beautiful things from being forgotten. It was the one piece of myself that was allowed to exist in the public space of the house. I came home from running errands, soaked from the rain, and walked into the living room. I stopped dead in my tracks. The print was gone. In its place hung a massive, brightly colored, professionally shot portrait of Jessica. It was her senior high school photo, blown up to an absurd size, her smile wide and confident, her eyes sparkling. It dominated the entire wall. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like a physical blow. I searched the room, my heart pounding, a sick feeling rising in my throat. I finally found my print, my grandmother's gift, propped carelessly against a damp wall in the corner of the entryway, behind a coat rack. It wasn't even leaned properly. It was tilted at an angle, and I could see a small water stain already forming at the bottom edge of the wooden frame. I picked it up, my hands shaking with a rage so profound it felt cold. I walked into the kitchen where my mother and Jessica were sitting at the table, laughing as they flipped through a college brochure. My father was reading the newspaper nearby. "What is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I held up the print. My mother glanced at it, then back at Jessica's portrait with a proud smile. "Oh, that! Doesn't Jessica look stunning? We thought the living room needed a more modern, personal touch. It really brightens up the space, don't you think?" "You took down Grandma's print," I said, my voice trembling, "and you left it on a wet wall to be ruined." My father lowered his newspaper, peering at me over his glasses. "Don't be so dramatic, Lily. It's just a picture. We needed the wall space. Jessica is living here now. We want to make the house feel like her home, too." His words echoed the same sentiment he'd used before, but this time they cut deeper. Making Jessica feel at home meant erasing the last visible trace of me, and more importantly, of my grandmother. "That print was a gift from Grandma Eleanor," I said, my voice cracking. "It meant everything to me." Jessica, who had been silent until now, chimed in with a dismissive shrug. "I mean, it's kind of a boring picture of an old building, Lily. My portrait is way more cheerful." That was it. The casual, thoughtless cruelty of her words and the smiling approval on my parents' faces shattered something inside me. This wasn't just about a room or a picture. This was a fundamental lack of respect for my feelings, my history, and my most cherished relationship. They had taken my sanctuary, dismissed my career, and now they were desecrating a memory. In that moment, the years of quiet resentment and swallowed anger coalesced into a single, crystal-clear thought. I can't live here anymore. It was the bung tin moment, the final, undeniable truth. They would never see me. They would never value me. I would always be secondary, an afterthought, a convenience to be moved and managed as they saw fit. The image of the water stain seeping into the beautiful old frame was a metaphor for my life in that house, my own value, slowly being eroded by their constant, casual neglect. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head, as clear as if she were standing next to me. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small in the spaces you occupy." I turned without another word, carried the print down to my basement room, and gently laid it on my bed. I looked around the cramped, musty space, at the single bare bulb, at the boxes of my life stacked in the corner. This wasn't a home. It was a holding cell, and my sentence was over. I sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now, my mind sharp and focused. The fear and guilt had been washed away by a tide of righteous anger and newfound resolve. I wasn't going to look for an apartment. I was going to execute a plan my grandmother had set in motion over a year ago. A plan my parents knew nothing about. A plan that would change everything. The time for waiting was over. The time for building had begun. The Monday morning after the portrait incident, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My supervisor was so surprised, she asked if I needed her to send a doctor. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I just have some urgent personal business to attend to." The business was located in a safety deposit box at a downtown bank. The box wasn't in my name, not technically. It was under the Eleanor Grand Trust, an entity I hadn't fully understood until after my grandmother's will was read. As the bank manager led me into the cold, sterile vault, my mind drifted back to the lawyer's office a year ago. My parents had been there, expecting my grandmother's modest savings to be split between my father and my aunt. They were shocked when her lawyer, Miss Davies, announced that the bulk of her estate was not cash, but a single, significant asset placed into a trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust was me. When he revealed what the asset was, they had scoffed. A run-down old hotel? What's Lily going to do with that? My father had said. It's probably a money pit. She should sell it immediately. They saw it as a burden, a final act of eccentricity from a woman they never truly understood. I, however, had understood perfectly. It was a legacy. It was a chance. Inside the small, private viewing room, I lifted the lid of the heavy metal box. On top lay a thick manila envelope with my name written in my grandmother's elegant, looping script. Inside was a letter, along with a set of keys and a heavy, official-looking deed. I had read the letter a dozen times, but today, its words felt like a call to action. "My dearest Lilybug," it began, "if you are reading this, I am gone, but I am not leaving you empty-handed. I am leaving you potential. The Eleanor Grand is more than just bricks and mortar. It's a piece of our city's history, and a piece of my heart. I know your parents will tell you to sell it. They see a liability. I know you will see what I see. Good bones, a beautiful soul, and a second chance. I've established a trust with enough funds to cover the property taxes for 5 years and to begin the most critical repairs. The rest is up to you. Use your gift, Lily. See the potential. Build something that is yours. A space where you are not small, but grand. This is your foundation. Build your life upon it." My secret weapon wasn't just a building. It was a fully funded head start. For the past year, I had been working quietly behind the scenes. I'd used the trust funds to hire surveyors and structural engineers. I'd had the electrical and plumbing systems completely overhauled. I had spent my weekends there, personally overseeing the restoration of the small, 10-room west wing of the hotel, bringing it up to modern code while preserving its historic charm. The hotel wasn't ready for a grand opening, not by a long shot. The main lobby was still under tarps, and the east wing was untouched. But the west wing was finished. It was beautiful, and it was habitable. I didn't need to find an apartment. I had 10 of them. My first call was to Mr. Davies. I explained the situation at home in brisk, professional terms. There was no emotion in my voice. I was an architect outlining a problem. "I'm ready to take the next step," I told him. "I need to dissolve my tenancy at my parents' address and officially change my residence to the Eleanor Grand. What do I need to do?" He was all business. "I'll draw up the paperwork, Lily. I'm proud of you. Eleanor would be, too." My next call was to Chloe. "Operation Exodus is a go," I said, a smile finally breaking through my determined facade. "Can you help me move this weekend?" Her shriek of joy was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I've got my brother's truck and an army of friends who owe me favors. When and where?" The plan was simple and discreet. I would move my essential belongings out on Saturday while my parents and Jessica were at one of Jessica's all-day cheerleading competitions. I would leave a note, along with a check for the next month's rent of final, clean severing of our financial arrangement. I wouldn't tell them where I was going. I knew they wouldn't be worried. They'd be annoyed at the inconvenience, at the loss of my income, but they wouldn't truly care about my welfare. They would assume I was crashing on Chloe's couch. For the rest of the week, I lived a double life. By day, I was the dutiful architectural assistant. By night, I was the quiet tenant in the basement, secretly packing my life into unlabeled boxes. I felt a thrilling sense of power, a feeling I had never experienced before. I was no longer reacting to their whims. I was executing my own meticulously crafted plan. Every box I packed was a brick in my new foundation. Every secret phone call was a blueprint for my future. They thought they had cornered me, pushed me into the lowest, most insignificant space in their lives. They had no idea I was about to move into a castle they didn't even know existed. The coming confrontation wasn't going to be a tearful plea for respect. It was going to be a grand opening. 2 weeks after my silent departure, Life had settled into a new, exhilarating rhythm. I was living in a beautiful, sun-drenched suite on the top floor of the west wing of the Eleanor Grand. Waking up to the view of the city skyline instead of a concrete wall was a daily reminder of my freedom. I had hired a small, dedicated staff, a retired hotel manager named Arthur, who was a godsend, and a handful of housekeepers. The West Wing wasn't officially open to the public, but I had started a soft launch, renting rooms to colleagues and friends of friends who needed a place to stay downtown. The feedback was incredible, and the small income stream was encouraging. My parents, on the other hand, were not adapting as well. After discovering my note and the check, they had bombarded my phone with a series of increasingly frantic texts and voicemails. The initial messages were angry. "How dare you leave without a word? This is incredibly disrespectful, Lily." Then, as the reality of my absence set in, the tone shifted to one of inconvenience. "The dishwasher is making a funny noise again. Do you know who to call? And Jessica's car has a flat tire. She needs a ride to school tomorrow." I responded to all of them with a polite, brief text. "I'm safe and well. I will be in touch when I'm settled." The lack of information clearly infuriated them. The stage for the final confrontation was set. Not by me, but by them. My mother called me on a Thursday afternoon. Her voice a syrupy blend of fake warmth and passive aggression. "Lily, darling," she began. "We haven't heard from you. We've been so worried. I let the lie hang in the air. I told you I was fine, Mom." "Well, anyway," she continued, getting to the real point of her call. "Your Aunt Carol is coming into the city next weekend to visit Jessica and tour some college campuses. We thought, since you were so selfish as to abandon your family, the least you could do is make it up to us. We need you to book them a nice hotel room for Friday and Saturday night, a suite, if you can. It's the least you can do to pay us back for the years we housed you." The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me, their former basement-dwelling cash cow, to pay for a luxury weekend for the very people who had displaced me. A wicked, brilliant idea sparked in my mind. It was perfect. "You know what, Mom?" I said, my voice sweet as honey. "I can absolutely do that. I have the perfect place in mind. Don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of the booking and text you the address. It will be my treat." The look of smug satisfaction I could practically hear through the phone was almost comical. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully guilt-tripped me into submission. On Friday evening, I stood in the newly restored lobby of the Eleanor Grand, watching the entrance through the security monitor in the back office. Arthur stood beside me, a knowing smile on his face. "Are you ready for this, Miss Vance?" he asked. "More than ready, Arthur," I replied. At 7 p.m. sharp, a taxi pulled up, and my parents, Aunt Carol and Jessica, stepped out. Their faces as they looked up at the beautifully lit, historic facade of the hotel were a picture of awe. "Wow!" Lily really splurged, I heard Jessica say. They walked in, their footsteps echoing on the polished marble floors. Arthur greeted them from behind the ornate, original 1,922nd front desk. "Good evening," he said warmly. "Welcome to the Eleanor Grand. May I help you?" My father stepped forward, looking important. "Yes, we have a reservation. A suite, booked by Lily Vance." Arthur tapped a few keys on his computer, feigning a search. "Ah, yes. The Vance party. We have a special note on your reservation. Miss Vance is waiting for you upstairs. She wanted to greet you personally. She's in the owner's suite." The color drained from my father's face. My mother's smile faltered. "The owner's suite?" she stammered. Arthur just smiled. "This way, please. I'll escort you." The elevator ride to the penthouse floor must have been the longest of their lives. I was waiting for them, standing by the large picture window of the suite, which overlooked the entire city. The room was gorgeous, a mix of restored vintage furniture and modern comforts. They stepped out of the elevator and just stood there, staring. At the room, at the view, and finally, at me. I was wearing a tailored dress, my hair was done, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly in control. "Welcome," I said calmly. "I'm so glad you could make it. Lily, what is this?" my Aunt Carol finally whispered, her eyes darting around the luxurious suite. "Where are we?" My father found his voice, a choked, strangled sound. The front desk manager said, "He said this was the owner's suite." I smiled, a genuine, serene smile. "He's right. Welcome to my hotel." The collective synchronized drop of their jaws was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. "Your hotel?" my mother repeated, as if the words were in a foreign language. "How?" "Grandma Eleanor," I explained simply. "She left it to me. She believed I could see its potential. She knew I could build something beautiful." I walked over to the console table and picked up a small framed photo of my grandmother that I kept there. "She left me a foundation, and I've been building on it." My father finally connected the dots, his face turning a shade of pale gray. "You owned a hotel this entire time? While you were living in our house? In our basement?" "Let's be accurate, Dad," I corrected him gently. "I was living in your storage room, and I stayed because I thought my family needed my help. But I realized my home wasn't a place where I was valued or respected. So I decided to move into the home my grandmother so thoughtfully provided for me." I walked over to the small, elegant desk in the corner and picked up a piece of paper. "I hope you enjoy your stay," I said, handing the reservation confirmation to my mother. "I've given you the friends and family rate. It's the least I can do." They stood there, speechless, in the middle of my suite, in the middle of my hotel, in the middle of my new life. They had wanted me to book them a room. Instead, I had shown them I owned the entire building. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely and irrevocably demolished. And in its place, something new was being built. The weekend that was supposed to be a triumphant display of their power over me became a long, agonizing lesson in their powerlessness. My parents, aunt, and cousin stayed in the suite, but the celebratory mood they had arrived with had evaporated, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence that I imagine was as suffocating as the air in my old basement room. I instructed the staff to treat them like any other guests, with politeness and professionalism, sending up room service when they ordered it, and providing fresh towels. I was a ghost in my own hotel, aware of their presence but detached from it. It was a strange reversal. For years I had been the invisible one in their house, and now they were the invisible ones in mine. I didn't see them again until Sunday morning. They checked out at the front desk, a process handled by Arthur with impeccable grace. They avoided my eyes as I stood near the entrance, reviewing some paperwork with the concierge. My father placed a credit card on the counter to pay the heavily discounted bill, his movements stiff and awkward, his usual blustering confidence completely gone. "The room was very nice," my mother mumbled, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder, unable to look at the life I had built without them. And then they were gone, leaving the lobby of my hotel and, in a way, my life. The departure felt less like a victory and more like the closing of a heavy, ancient book. As the large glass doors swung shut behind them, I didn't feel elation or the sharp thrill of revenge. I felt a profound sense of peace, the kind of quiet that settles after a long and violent storm. I was no longer waiting for their approval or bracing for their next casual cruelty. I was free. The days that followed were a whirlwind of hard, rewarding work. It was a baptism by fire, but I welcomed the heat. I officially opened the west wing of the Eleanor Grand to the public, and the responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. I poured every ounce of my being into the project, fueled by a purpose that felt clearer and more potent than anything I had ever known. I was no longer just an assistant executing someone else's vision. I was the architect of my own. I spent my days meeting with contractors about the East Wing renovation, my evenings developing marketing strategies, and my nights falling into a deep, dreamless sleep in my beautiful suite. Exhausted but deeply, fundamentally content, the hotel began to build a quiet buzz. It was unique, a piece of history lovingly brought into the modern age. I partnered with a brilliant young chef named Daniel, who was looking to open his first restaurant. I remember our first meeting in the hotel's dusty, cavernous old dining room. He didn't see the peeling paint and cobwebs. He saw a space for magic. His passion was infectious. "We can make this the heart of the hotel," he'd said, his eyes alight with ideas. We transformed it into the Gilded Spoon, which quickly became one of the city's most talked-about new eateries. The synergy between the historic hotel and the innovative restaurant was perfect. I found myself not just running a business, but curating an experience, creating a space where people felt welcomed, valued, and inspired. It was everything I had never felt in my parents' house. I heard about the fallout at home through Chloe, who got the occasional, filtered update from a mutual acquaintance. The first thing my parents noticed was the silence. Then came the practical realities. My father, in a moment of frustrated pride, tried to fix the leaking faucet in the kitchen himself and ended up flooding the floor. A $2,000 mistake a plumber could have fixed for $200. Jessica, it turned out, was not the helpful, cheerful houseguest they had imagined. Without me as a buffer and a target for their casual disregard, the small annoyances of living with a teenager became major sources of conflict. They were forced to confront the mountain of invisible labor I had performed for years, the emotional and practical support they had taken for granted. For me, the most significant change was internal. The timid, accommodating person who would apologize when someone else bumped into her was gone. One afternoon, a linen vendor tried to drastically inflate his prices, assuming I was a naive new business owner. The old Lily would have stammered and likely agreed to a compromise that was still a ripoff. The new Lily looked him dead in the eye, calmly presented 3 competing quotes, and told him he could either match the lowest price or she would find another supplier by the end of the day. He matched the price. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. I learned to trust my own instincts. I learned that my voice was worth listening to. Daniel and I fell into an easy rhythm of working together, our late-night business meetings often bleeding into long conversations about life and dreams. "You know," he said one evening as we sat in the closed restaurant after a busy service, "you saved this place. You saw what it could be." I smiled. "I had a good teacher," I said, thinking of my grandmother. "She taught me to always look for the good bones." It occurred to me then that I hadn't just restored a building. I had restored myself. I had found my own good bones, buried under years of neglect, and built a new life around them. The sense of freedom was intoxicating. It was the quiet confidence of knowing that I had not just found a home, I had created one. And as the foundation for the East Wing renovation was being laid, I knew with absolute certainty that my own new foundation was just as solid, and no one could ever take it away from me again. 1 year later, I stood on the newly opened rooftop terrace of the Eleanor Grand, the Eleanor's Overlook, watching the sunset paint the Chicago skyline in shades of orange and purple. The terrace, my own design from the ground up, was the final, sparkling jewel in the hotel's completed restoration. Tonight was our official grand opening party, and the space was packed with guests, city tastemakers, and the entire team who had helped bring this dream to life. The air buzzed with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the smooth sounds of a live jazz trio. The hotel was a resounding success, more than I could have ever imagined. We had been featured in Condé Nast Traveler as America's most charming historic revival, and had a waiting list for weekend bookings that stretched for months. The Gilded Spoon, just last month, had earned its first Michelin star, a testament to Daniel's genius and our shared vision. My life was unrecognizable from the quiet, predictable, and soul-crushingly invisible existence I had led just over a year before. My professional life had blossomed, and so had my personal one. My partnership with Daniel had grown from professional respect into a deep and loving relationship. He was my partner in every sense of the word, celebrating my successes as his own and challenging me to be bolder and more creative. He never tried to shrink me to fit his world. He was constantly encouraging me to expand mine. We were a team, building both a business and a life together with a foundation of mutual admiration. I was no longer alone. I was surrounded by a chosen family, Chloe, who now handled the hotel's PR, Arthur, who ran the day-to-day operations like a seasoned maestro, and the rest of my incredible staff. The fate of my parents and cousin had unfolded not with a dramatic crash, but with a slow, quiet deflation. As I had suspected, the financial strain of maintaining their large house without my contribution became too much. About 6 months after I left, They sold the house, the one filled with so many hollow memories and the ghost of my grandmother's print, and downsized to a small two-bedroom condo in a suburb an hour outside the city. The move was a significant blow to their social standing and their pride. They had lost the stage upon which they performed their version of a perfect family life. Their relationship with Aunt Carol and Jessica had also soured completely. Without the big house to offer as a sanctuary, and without the financial means to be endlessly generous, my parents were no longer as useful. Jessica, faced with the reality of a smaller home and less financial coddling, became resentful. She ended up going to a local community college, a far cry from the prestigious universities she had been dreaming of. The golden grandchild had lost her luster once the gold-plated support system was removed. I heard from a distant relative that Aunt Carol had called my mother to ask for help with Jessica's tuition, and my mother, for the first time in her life, had been forced to say no. That phone call, I was told, had ended their sisterly bond for good. My parents did try to reconcile with me. It started with awkward phone calls, then an invitation to dinner at a neutral restaurant. The first time we met, the power dynamic was so profoundly different it felt like I was meeting strangers. They were no longer the dispensers of conditional affection. They were two people who seemed a little lost. My father, humbled by their changed circumstances, actually apologized. "We took you for granted, Lily," he said, staring into his water glass. We didn't see you. I let your mother focus everything on Jessica because it was easier. It was lazy. And it was wrong. I'm sorry." My mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "We thought Jessica needed us more," she whispered. "It never occurred to us that you needed us too, and we were failing you." "We all need to be seen, Mom," I had replied, my voice gentle but firm. "Some of us are just quieter about asking for it." We began a new kind of relationship, one built on carefully constructed boundaries. I helped them, but not in the old way. I didn't give them money, but I connected my father with a physical therapist who specialized in back injuries, paid for by the excellent insurance I now had as a business owner. I invited them to Sunday brunch at the hotel once a month, always on my terms, in my space. They were learning to treat me as an equal, a successful adult, not the family utility. One crisp autumn afternoon, my mother came to the hotel alone. She brought with her a large, carefully wrapped package. "I wanted you to have this," she said, her hands trembling slightly. I unwrapped it. It was the architectural print of the Eleanor Grand. The frame had been beautifully, expertly restored, the water stain completely gone. The wood gleamed. "I took it to a professional at the Art Institute," she explained. I know I didn't appreciate what it meant to you. What she meant to you. It belongs here, in its home." I hung the print in a place of honor in my private office, a room that overlooked the hotel's bustling lobby. It was a perfect circle. The symbol of my grandmother's legacy, once discarded and devalued, was now restored and respected, much like myself. Justice, I realized in that moment, wasn't about them being punished or me gloating over their misfortune. It was about balance being restored. It was about me thriving in the light while they learned to live without the convenience of my shadow. They had tried to confine me to a small, dark room in the basement, but in doing so, they had inadvertently handed me the keys to a grand hotel. They had wanted to make me smaller, and instead, they had forced me to become bigger than I had ever dreamed. The greatest justice was the beautiful, joyful life I had built for myself, not on the ashes of my old life, but on the solid foundation of my own worth. As I look back on the journey that brought me here, standing on this rooftop under a canopy of stars, surrounded by the beautiful life I built, I realize the most profound lesson wasn't about business or architecture. It was about the architecture of the self. For so long, I had allowed my value to be dictated by the space others allotted me. I accepted the small room, the cramped basement, the overlooked corner, because a part of me, a part conditioned since childhood, believed it was all I deserved. My parents' house had walls, a roof, and a bed, but it was never truly a home. A home isn't just a structure, it's a sanctuary. It's the place where your soul can exhale. It's where you are seen, valued, and given not just space to exist, but room to grow, to be messy, to fail, and to flourish. For years, I was like a plant kept in a pot that was far too small, my roots bound and tangled, my growth stunted not by a lack of sunlight or water, but by a simple lack of space. The moment they took my room away, they thought they were taking away the last piece of my territory. They believed they were completing my containment. What they were actually doing was giving me a priceless, brutal gift. The undeniable proof that I needed to build my own territory, on my own land. They shattered the small pot, and in doing so, they forced me to plant myself in the wide open earth, where I discovered I wasn't a fragile houseplant after all. I had the roots of a mighty oak. My grandmother knew that. She didn't just leave me a building. She left me a blueprint for self-respect. She understood that sometimes the only way to find your place in the world is to create it from the ground up, with your own hands, according to your own design. The Eleanor Grand is made of bricks and mortar, but the home I've built within its walls, and more importantly, within myself, is made of something far stronger. The unwavering certainty that I am worthy of taking up space in this world. The greatest betrayal I experienced wasn't being moved to the basement. That was just a symptom. The real betrayal was the slow, steady erosion of my spirit over decades. The realization that the people who were supposed to be my foundation were actually the ones causing the cracks. But that betrayal, in a strange and beautiful twist of fate, became my liberation. It was the necessary demolition that had to happen before new construction could begin. It forced me to stop asking for a seat at their table, a table where I was only ever served scraps, and instead, to design and build my own grand dining room, with a table big enough for anyone who, like me, was looking for a place to truly belong. I learned that the family you are born into gives you your history, but the family you choose gives you your future. That chosen family isn't bound by blood, but by respect. They are the ones who celebrate your light, instead of trying to dim it to make someone else shine brighter. They are the ones who don't just see the finished building, but who show up with a shovel when you're still digging the foundation. They are the team that cheers you on when you finally reach the rooftop, not because of the view, but because they know how hard you climbed to get there. I know how terrifying it is to take that first step, to swing the first sledgehammer at the walls of a life that feels safe but is slowly suffocating you. It feels so much easier to stay in the small pot, to accept the cramped space, because it's familiar. But your blueprint for a better, bigger life is already inside you, folded up and waiting. It might be written in the language of your secret passions, your quiet dreams, the things that make your heart beat faster. You just have to give yourself permission to unfold it, to read it, and to believe in the structure it describes. Your foundation is your own worth. Build on it. Tell me about the moment you realized you needed to draw your own blueprint. What was the Jortnook Tranley for you? The one that forced you to stop accepting the space you were given and start building the space you deserved? I would be honored to read your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more real-life lessons about building the life you deserve. Remember to share this video with someone who might be living in a basement of their own, someone who needs a reminder that their value isn't defined by the room others give them. Thank you for listening. And remember, if they won't give you a place at their table, go out and build your own palace.